Yeah, got it. All right. Okay. Right. Okay. So welcome everybody again to the third meeting of the Commission. So we're at the halfway stage. There's a lot of work that's been done, and we've got some representations of that on the agenda. We will have the session for group discussion as well. As ever, it's only about just over, I think it's about 35 minutes, so it's not a huge amount of time to cover the material. But I remind you that I'm always open for any comments, any kind of written or want to have a chat with me that you weren't able to raise in this meeting. I'm always available. Well, I shouldn't say that, should I? I am available to have those discussions outside the meeting, because I know there's all sorts of things that can come up. Okay, so we'll start off with the minutes from the last meeting. There are some action points, but is everybody happy with the minutes? And if there's anyone has any concerns, just if you just show them now. No, I don't see any. Good, that's great. In terms of the actions, that's pretty straightforward. The main issue, I think, is the minutes, and whether, to what extent we have these available beyond this group. I have no concern about that. I mean, I think the normal system is to wait until the minutes have been approved at the next meeting, i.e. last meeting's minutes will be approved today, so would be available afterwards. But are there any concerns, any objections to the way the minutes that we're presenting at the moment would be problematic if we made them available generally, i.e. on the web? This meeting is recorded anyway and presented as a video on the web, so it's not it's already information's getting out. Any objections? No? Okay, so I think that'll be good in terms of transparency. John Rook was going to check with primary care colleagues on feedback about GP training, and I gather we've not actually had a response from John yet. So I don't know if John's here. I'm just scanning through. If not, we'll check that out. Steph liaised with Alex Bowman, and in terms of the survey and enabling youngsters with communication difficulties, that's been done, and the engagement plan has been circulated, I think, to everybody. So I think all those points from the minutes, the action points, have all been done. Okay, so we'll move on to the main business. Now, as you see, we've got three major items, and I think the general point I want to make is that I've always seen this commission as, and I think I've said this before, not as something that kind of exists, nothing happens, and then something happens at the end. There are plans for what will follow it, but what's always been the intention is that life goes on, and the authority is and has started and has carried on with various initiatives about the way the system is operating. And I've been feeding in information as well outside this meeting to assist that. And also I've been receiving, and I've been in some of the meetings on various initiatives which are going on. So we've got three here. One that I think is now pretty much a permanent permanent item, which is Hugh Jones bringing us up to date with some local data. And Hugh and I have interactions between to kind of identify some particular aspects of data that might be particularly useful at certain times. So this time, of course, we're focusing on the statutory assessment, and so looking at the HCPs. And then there's some feedback, some of the work I've been doing, going to meetings, and we've divided that into the parent carers, health and care professionals, and schools. And then the third of these is this presentation from Claire, which is Claire Lawton, which is a quality assurance audit, which was taken place fairly recently, literally. And this has been a very quick report from Claire, and I'll say something a bit about that before she starts. So those are the three major items. They're very big and complex, but I hope that these introductions will enable a really good discussion when we get into the item 5, which is the breakout groups. And as I say, what comes after that. And then Steph will just bring us up to date with the surveys. So Hugh, can I just pass straight over to you, and we'll hear from you with your presentation. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Jeff. Just as the meeting started, a group of scaffolders have arrived just outside my home. They're going to be putting scaffolding up around the house, so I can hear the jocular shouts to each other as they pass instructions to each other have just started. So I may be interrupted periodically, but I'll do my best to just carry on regardless. So hopefully you should be able to see my screen at the moment. Let me just see if I can make that go as a proper presentation. And I need to be able to see what people are saying. So this is testing my skill in using Zoom here. So there we go. If I pull those people across and make the chat visible, that's great. Okay, so we're going to be looking at issues around EHC plans, principally, and the data around EHC plans, recent data, plus some historical information. And it's connected with the kinds of assessment that are made of pupils of the EHC plan, what type of need they have. We're going to be comparing that information with data about the same groups of pupils across England. So if I just start off, if I can give focus to that. Right, so this is what we're going to cover. I'm going to be giving you some recent information, updates about EHCPs, timescales, what the picture currently looks like. You're probably aware that one of the issues for Newham is to try and improve the rate at which EHC plans are generated within timescale, and obviously to quality as well. So we'll see what the most recent data around that actually looks like. I'm going to be looking at the way that our SEN types compare from January 2021, both SEN support and EHC plans with England, and highlight the differences. We're going to be looking at trends and a few kind of key ones. We're going to be comparing Newham with the England national values over time for ASD, moderate learning difficulty, social, emotional and mental health, not the summary, but SLCN, speech, language and communication needs. I realized after I constructed this slide that the boxes emerge in the wrong order. So and then finally, I will do the summary. That will be the last thing that I will actually cover. So that's what we're going to be looking at today, principally focused around EHC plans, but I'll extend it to SEN support as well, because the differences between the two can be quite revealing. So the first thing to note is that the number of referral requests has actually been going up over time. It's been a slight recent dip, but typically that's kind of rising quite sharply. There is a kind of a seasonal trend here. You can see that for August last year and August this year, there's a slight dip, but overall those numbers are actually rising. For 2021, there were 55 per month on average, the HCP referrals. And since April 2021, those are going up to 70 a month. So lots of referrals for new EHC plans, a lot of pressure to kind of deliver those within time scale, but we can see a recent increase. What is the actual figure? How did we look in terms of the proportion of EHC plans completed within 20 weeks? Well, back in April and May and June, not so good. So the proportions that were completed in timescale, I've got the percentages, a little bar chart on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, a table with the actual numbers in the numerators and denominators, so you can see what we're talking about. So for April, May, and June, we were talking about 5%. None of the 29 were completed in 20 weeks in April, and 7 out of 53 in June. That's 13%. But since then, there have been significant jumps in the proportion of EHC plans that are being completed within the 20-week timescale. The most recent data we have is for September, and that's taken us up to around 3/4, about 75% completed within timescale. So good news, at least in terms of the proportion completed within statutory timescale. How have EHC plans, thinking about the way that EHC plans are rising, and we know that the numbers have been rising in Newham, how have they varied by age over the last 6 or 7 years? And the answer is quite a lot. So what we've got here is the number of EHC plans that were that were under the statutory control of the council, issued by the council between January 2014 and January 2021. And we're using the age bands 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 11 to 15, and 16 to 19. What you can see is that pupils of statutory school age from 5 to 16 have in recent years risen really rapidly. So the numbers are on the left-hand side on the axis there, but you can see how much that has changed. Around 2014, 15, 16, the numbers of EHC plans for pupils aged 5 to 10 and 11 to 16 to 11 to 15, to some extent 16 to 19, were falling. And that's completely reversed. The numbers have actually been rising very sharply, but principally in the pupils between the ages of 5 to 15. You can see those numbers rising pretty dramatically there. And how does the pattern of need in Newham look when we compare it with the national average? But there's some really significant differences. So if we look at this chart, what we've got on the right-hand side, so on the left-hand side is the breakdown for SEN support. The black bars represent Newham and the orangey bars are the England average. And each of those will tot up to 100%. So if you totted up the percentages of the next to the black bars, the Newham ones for SEN support, that would come to 100%, so with England. And so the same thing for EHC plans. So we can just look at how the proportions are distributed within Newham and nationally and see how different they are. So we can see, for instance, I'm not going to do a comparison directly between the two, just going down the list. Speech, language and communication needs. We've a very high proportion of pupils, speech, language and communication needs, who have got SEN support, higher than the national average. But percentage with the EHC plans is actually a little bit lower, 11 compared to 15%. We are low for pupils with specific learning difficulties as well, both for SEN support and EHC plans. Social, emotional, mental health is low for both, lower than England average. Although it doesn't look like a huge issue, so I should say PMLD, profound and multiple learning difficulty. We have a very high proportion of pupils with profound multiple learning difficulty with the EHC plans, much higher than the national average, only at 3%, at least 3 times the national average, very, very high. Perhaps that's a reflection, we can reflect on the way in which Newham has been allocating EHC plans to pupils with very high levels of need compared to other local authorities, becoming national average. We can see that coming through very clearly for PMLD there. Other differences are moderate learning difficulty. We simply do not use that category very much in Newham. We're low both for percentage of pupils who've got special educational needs support, SEN support, and EHC plans. And then we get down to the bottom one, which is autistic spectrum. And we can see both for SEN support and in particular for pupils with EHC plans, it's actually extremely high. Nearly half, 47% in January 2021, nearly half of the EHC plans in Newham were for autism. All right, that's much higher than the national average of 30-odd%. So there's a big difference. And how have these changed over time? Well, this is looking at pupils on the autistic spectrum. So on the left-hand side, we've got information from 2016 to 21, pupils with SEN support and EHC plan. Black line is Newham, orange line is England, as in the previous chart. So what you can see is that we've got upward trends. There's some evidence actually in the latest data that the fairly dramatic rise, especially for pupils with the EHC plans in Newham for autism, has stalled a little bit. We have wait interesting to see what will happen next year as more pupils on high needs funding get converted into EHC plans. But there's some evidence it's stalled a little bit, but the growth in Newham is much more rapid than the rise nationally. And there has been a rise nationally, both for pupils SEN support and EHC plans, they've both risen, but in Newham, much faster than the national average. although you can't quite see it, that this is for moderate learning difficulty. I said we don't tend not to use that category. Well, I guess it's a kind of opposite story. It's almost like a mirror image of what we were seeing for autism. So that both England and Newham, the usage of that category for people's SEN support and EHC plans has been falling, but in Newham much faster. Although again, interestingly, right, the most recent data we've got, there's some evidence that might be bottoming out in Newham, that may even be slightly increasing, but it's not a very significant degree. So again, wait to see what happens in January when we get the most recent data. Social, emotional and mental health, SEMH. I said that we were coming out below national average. That's not always been the case. I mean, look, interesting to see how this has changed, especially for pupils SEMH with EHC plans. Back in 2016, the proportion of pupils in Newham was higher than the national average, but a downward trend has taken us now clearly being below national average, although again, a slight increase in 2021. Not enough to bridge the gap. We're now tracking national percentage changes. And the same goes for SEN support. We were at a point a few years ago where the proportion of pupils SEN support with social, emotional, mental health was above the national average, and it's now dropped a little bit below. So we are not behaving the same way as national trends. And finally, speech, language and communication needs. It's interesting that we have a higher proportion of pupils in SEN support with speech language. It's what we saw in the original chart, and that's been showing us the differences in January. But you can see how that's evolved over time. For pupils on SEN support, the trend has actually been much sharper. The increase in Newham has been much greater than it has nationally, and so quite a large gap has opened up. We are slowly bridging the gap for pupils with the EHC plan, approaching the national average, but we are kind of below. We have been quite systematically below national average for proportions of pupils with the EHC plans who've got speech, language and communication needs. Again, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in January 2022, not just here, but that's why we need that information for the national average as well, to see if we are kind of narrowing that gap even further. So what we're seeing is that these trends over time about the pattern of assessment, both for SEN support and in particular, I guess, EHC plans, focus rate, means that Newham doesn't look exactly the same as every other local authority. And the trends can be quite interesting, revealing, and I guess I like to think there will be some discussion about why these things might be happening here today. So very briefly, in summary, so it's going to be a very short presentation. EHC completion rates within 20 weeks are improving. So watch this space. Let's hope we can maintain that pattern and level of improvement. In terms of SEN support, we have high proportions of pupils with speech, language and communication needs or autism, and low moderate learning difficulties and specific learning difficulties. For pupils with EHC plans, high profound and multiple learning difficulties, autism, and low moderate learning difficulties, specific learning difficulties, speech, language and communication, and social, emotional, and mental health. Autism is high and rising over time, especially for pupils with EHC plans, but that may be leveling off. Moderate learning difficulty we know is extremely low, especially for pupils on SEN support. Social, emotional, mental health is falling from above to below national average, both for pupils on SEN support and EHC plans. Speech, language and communication is high and rising for SEN support, rising for EHC plans as well, but is below the national average. That's my presentation on the data. I hope there's a lot of noise happening here. There's a lot of drilling. I'm not sure, and things being connected together with drills and things. So I do hope it's not interrupted what I'm saying too much, but it certainly put me off a little bit. But hopefully we can now open this up to discussion. So if I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Okay, well, thanks, Hugh. I couldn't hear any drilling.
Good.
So either you've got fantastic double glazing, or you've got exceptional scaffolders. So thanks very much. That was absolutely excellent, Hugh. I think there's a lot of information there which raises some interesting questions. As an aside, one of the things that I've been involved with for the last 10, 15 years has been this tracking of what's going on in SEND. That's one of the reasons I was asking if you would present some of these trends over time, because I've got data going back to 2010 as well, but the most recent is the more, is the key thing. So great, that's really good. So anyone want to raise a point or ask you a question for clarity? I'll throw it open. I just have to make sure I actually see it. Anthony, I can see your hand up, or your yellow hand here. Can I pass over to you then for your comments?
Thank you very much, Jeff, and thank you, Hugh. I'd like to preface this by just saying that I come relatively fresh from a couple of days ago. We had the subgroup of the Education Partnership Board for SEND and Inclusion with head teachers sharing their views. The EHCPs are of huge concern to heads, and it is really encouraging to see the upward trend in completion. I don't think we can underestimate how poorly served the young people of the borough and the schools that tried to support them were by a situation where we had such a low proportion of EHCPs being completed within the statutory period. It is an unalloyed good thing that that proportion is going up. However, I think we need to be careful on a couple of fronts. One is that having introduced a threshold for statutory, head teachers know a certain amount about thresholds, and when you target thresholds, what about how can we look at the data to reassure ourselves about the 25% that are not being done within statutory? Because looking at that graph tells me nothing about whether that 25% are done within the following 10 weeks, or whether actually there are 10% of EHCPs which aren't being done for a year. So I think we need to introduce another metric which demonstrates the longest of the time, or there are lots of different ways of slicing it. How long? What's the median time for the 5% that take the longest to do? But something that gives us an indicator of what what is still a significant number of young people waiting a very long time for their EHCPs to be completed. The other point that I would like to ask or raise is, I am a little bit concerned about the emphasis on the proportions, because compared to national, because fundamentally we are not comparing like with like, because as we all know, Newham has not followed national patterns of behaviour in terms of recognising the importance of EHCPs to students' entitlement. We are still, I believe, below in terms of the proportion of high needs funded students who have EHCPs. So when we are looking at a graph which shows increased numbers of students with EHCPs, it would be really helpful to have on that our best estimate of what the number of young people with EHCPs would be if we were following national patterns. Because it's great to see those numbers going up, but that presentation gave no sense to me of, and I don't think I missed it. I don't think there was something there to indicate, and we still have this far to go. The other point that comes out of the difference between ourselves and national, and that worries me slightly about how we might interpret those graphs, as I understand it, it would be possible to have a situation where the number of pupils with high needs for ASD could be going up, but as a proportion of EHCPs, they could be going down. I'm sure most people will get this point, but I'll just extend it a little and then Hugh can tell me if I'm getting this wrong. But my understanding is we have a much lower proportion of EHCPs historically. We may be addressing one sector of that well, and it may mean that there are other areas like MLD and SPLD that we haven't addressed. As we get round to doing those, the proportion of those will rise, but that does not in practice mean that the number of students with those needs is rising. So I think we need to really caveat the data showing where it shows downward trends, it's a downward trend of the proportion currently receiving EHCPs. It absolutely does not mean that the number of students with high levels of need with ASD is decreasing, for example.
Can I come back on those? Those are really good points, Anthony, and I accept what you're saying in terms of the gaps that were presented in the data. You know, if I quickly go through those, yes, average time, we do monitor, of course, we track the length of time that every EHC plan takes for completion. And we do have information, we normally group them into the periods of time leading up to the statutory period and beyond as well. So if it would be of value to perhaps a future meeting, I can bring that kind of information back and we can talk about what the proportion and the timescales for the very longer EHC plans actually looks like. But you're absolutely right. It would be interesting if unfortunately, there's no national metric for the average length of time that EHC plans take. There's simply the percentage within 20 weeks. And you're right, that can create a perverse incentive to get things through just in time in the threshold and ignore things which aren't going to meet it. So it is an important point, but I can bring more information about the full distribution of timescales to a future meeting. Yet how far to go? That's a very good question. And so the issue there is about the conversion, which is currently underway, of proportions of pupils, numbers of pupils on high needs funding into EHC plans. And what would it look like when we get to that final point? I can't remember if it was this meeting or another one of the SEN groups where I did bring to the meeting the full, and this sort of partly gets at your next point as well, Anthony, about the numbers of pupils who were getting each of the various identified primary needs, ASD, SEN, SLCN, and so on, the total numbers over time. There's a complete picture of how many there were in each category, EHC plans over a number of years. So you could see how that was actually changing specifically. You're quite right, percentages can change, but if the total is changing, then it may not be an indication of how the actual numbers are changing within each category. There are still quite a few students who receive high needs funding who probably need to or are going to be transferred into EHC plans. How it will look in terms of their need type is something we can look into. So what we can say is, what would the picture look like if these high needs funded pupils are converted into EHC plans? What would the pattern look like? And that would be something I'd need to go back and work with data colleagues in the SEN team about. But that's something, again, which we can take a look at and bring to another meeting.
Thanks very much, Hugh.
Does that answer your questions,
Anthony? Anthony, is that helpful?
Yes, that was very helpful. And listening to you, Hugh, I mean, if I may just have a few seconds more to say, I think, well, you will know when you look at the data, but I think possibly if we just had a second cutoff point of how many, are all plans done within 40 weeks, or what percent, that's a fairly simple addition. A second threshold is not perfect, but it does provide significant reassurance. Yeah. And yes, I think, to be able to see on the 11 to 15-year-old and the one that you had the bar chart for the different ages and how many done, if we saw a top line of how many pupils are high needs funded currently, that would also help significantly. And I would imagine those could be done fairly quickly, and possibly if you could share a second version of that slide set with those inserted, that I hope that wouldn't be too much of an imposition, but maybe we could have that sooner rather than later. That's fine. Those are fairly straightforward corrections to add to it, Anthony. They're good suggestions. So I'll see if I can pull together an updated version and get that available to staff as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for that. I wasn't sure whether Sandy or Tim was next. Sorry. Can I go to Sandy? Is that okay? Sandy, please.
Thank you, Jeff. Going back to your first graph, which showed the dips in August and the general trend upwards and so on, but I noticed that covered the COVID period. So what I'm wondering is, was there any impact from that? Does it actually make sense not to compare with pre-COVID because of the amount of activity there has been in securing that 20-week target? maybe it wasn't important to compare, but I imagine that there must have been some impact from the COVID period on that 20-week target.
It's interesting to think about that, and I think when the DfE published its statistics for the COVID period nationally, I think I expected there to be a bigger hit on the national statistics than actually occurred. What actually happened was that, I'm not going to quote the exact percentages here, but pre-COVID, national completion rates for EHC plans within 20 weeks was around 60 or so percent. And during the COVID period, it fell to 58%. So actually, on a national scale, there wasn't such a huge impact on average. Now, how that plays out across every local authority, of course, is a different story. It did have an impact in Newham. And again, forgive me if I can't quite remember the percentages off the top of my head, but we had gone from a moderate, so 24, 25% down to 13, 14% during COVID. So it approximately halved where we were, but we were already working from a baseline that was well below national average. But pre-COVID, the completion rates within 20 weeks in Newham were almost the lowest in England. They were around 1 to 2%. So there are other changes, I think, probably more significant than COVID, which are affecting what we were actually doing to do with functioning, efficiency within the teams, etc., etc. But COVID certainly did have an effect, but less nationally than I would have expected.
Okay, thanks, Andy and Hugh. Tim, I'm going to have to make this the last one because we're just a bit behind. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Just to respond to Anthony's points, you're absolutely right, Anthony, and I know Hugh's responded to a lot of those points, but in our recovery plan, we've got all the information about lengths of time, frankly, we've got quite a significant backlog, and what additional capacity we need to ensure that we can address that backlog. And I think we accept, just because we've hit a better proportion of plans completed within time for a few months, that's only part of the story. That's only part of the picture. So, in reality, and Steph can give us a bit more exact information, it's going to take, the best part of a year to properly recover. And of course, it's not just about timeliness either. It's about quality as well. But no, I think we absolutely recognise it's a very significant task. Totally accept your point about the fact that children haven't received the right level of service in the past. I'm confident now we have a much clearer analysis of where the gaps are, and we've got a much clearer plan about how we're going to recover. And that does include ensuring we've got the right capacity in the right places. And I know Jessica and Anita are absolutely determined to make progress over the coming months.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Well, thanks for those, and we'll have obviously when the breakouts, we'll have an opportunity for everyone else to discuss this. So thanks for those questions and the responses. So if we go on to item 3, which is the feedback from the engagement activity. So I'm not going to kind of go reading through this. Steph, do you want to put up the slides? Okay, if we go on, right, so these, just a reminder, those are the 4 key themes. Right, and these are the kind of specific, half a dozen specific areas which we were focusing on at this period. The next one. And then here are some feedback from school leaders and Senkos, just about about 6 points. I'm assuming everyone's read all these, so I don't want to go through them all, but just to remind you what the 3 main sources of information are. I mean, clearly there's lots and lots of comments that come from these meetings, but these are kind of summarized, and you'll see they relate to timeliness, to communication, the need to increase staffing within the SEND casework system, there was a particular concern about, in some schools, delays were created because of the way the funding goes about in terms of making a request for an EHC assessment. And then there was issues of co-writing, a positive issue, which is coming out in the next session on outcomes and involvement of families with professions, and also the recognition that there are issues with some families of concerns that they have which need to be addressed in terms of their concerns about the way the system might actually be a negative experience for them. Next one, I think I just go through them all, Steph. So the next one is the parents' feedback. So there's issues here about cultural competency and training within all of us. The strong belief that without a plan, the child will not receive the support they need. And of course, this puts pressure on actually getting a plan rather than assessing the child's full needs, because not everyone will need a plan, even if they have a problem in a particular area. And so trying to get that right is obviously it's a delicate issue. There were some concerns about the way EHCPs feel, in some cases, copy and pasted. And that is obviously an issue about the writing of the plans and the way they're structured. It's often difficult for parents and non-professionals to understand things which we can easily take for granted, like who does what, where does assessment change into diagnosis, those sort of issues. And there are concerns about transparency in the way the system is working, including what provision is made and how it actually meets the needs of the youngster for each parent. And also concerns about the social care assessments that may be seen as, remember these are parents, focusing on safeguarding and child protection when most families need some other sort of support. And that's another one that was raised. And then thirdly, Steph, is the health and social care discussions that we had. So recognition of the Newham being an outlier, and that point is very important about that, and where Newham is in this progression from the situation just after the 2014 Act to now, and the difficulties comparing it with national data. I mean, that is recognised. Focus on timeliness. But the important point here, and I think it's a point that Tim just made, it's not just about timeliness, it's actually about getting it right and getting quality assessments. And that will come out in the next session. Service capacity is an issue. And then the way that the service, Disabled Children and Young People Service, is being redesigned. Another positive work to upskill social workers. And also the link between professionals and families, and the way that there should be more contact, but also discussions to help both understanding and co-production. So there are a series of areas to build on as well, which were identified across those the recent work that we've been doing. So the new forms which are appearing seem to be positively seen. Optimism that changes can be delivered under the new permanent leadership team. That's getting a lot of support, which is clearly a positive thing. There's also the interesting point, it was raised at the last meeting, about how there are these groups around, with WhatsApp groups, and there's, I think, a number of these. I think one, I was told by Steph, has over 2,600 members of it. So, there's a lot of support which is going on, hopefully positively, We know that in social media it isn't always positive. And so there's a number of points. I won't go through all of them. Some of those you can bring out in the next in the group session. So any quick points? That's really something for a lot of discussion, I think. But if there's any quick points, Tim, you've got your hand up, or is that old? Is that legacy?
Sorry, legacy hand.
Okay. Any quick points, or should we leave that to the breakouts and then go on to
Jeff? Sorry, yes, I think there is one point. It's Anthony. If may I think there is one point of major concern from school leaders that isn't fully reflected. Apologies if there's noise in the background. I have a very noisy printer rather than scaffolders. And if I'm being sworn at, that's a colleague, not a contractor. Tim referred a moment ago to the recovery plan, and we are talking a lot about timeliness and EHCPs. There is an underlying worry among school leaders that the implementation of the recovery plan will lead to significantly less funding being available for pupils in school. The simple fact is that there are several millions of pounds to be recovered. Nobody is blaming anybody else, I think, for the fact that we're in a very tight squeeze, and we know this is the national picture. But I just think I think there is a particular problem in Newham at the moment about making sure that school leaders do understand the amount of money that will be available if that deficit recovery plan is available in 3 years' time. The way it's been shared up till now, including at Schools Forum, it has made clear how much is being saved from certain areas, but we haven't seen the projections for how much is actually available. That could be, on my understanding, really significant to the tune of around 20%. Now, I may be wrong, and I'd love to be corrected, but it could mean that the money available for high needs funded pupils, EHCP pupils in Newham schools is cut by something of that order. And if that is the case, that's something that we need to be able to talk through the implications of, because that's a very major feature of the landscape for us.
Thanks very much. Tim?
Can I just, yeah,
thank you.
It's at the moment, Anthony, and I appreciate this is a number that does change as plans change. The reduction is likely to be around 7% overall. But I think you make a good point, which is as we are developing and refining that recovery plan, actually communicating more clearly with colleagues about what the likely impact is going to be on all schools, but also on specific schools, is going to be important. And I think whilst we have got to recover a significant amount of the deficit, we're also seeing the amount of in the high needs block increasing. So there's a mixed picture here. But I think absolutely how we articulate that to school leaders is going to be crucial moving forward.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, well, we're almost back on time, so I think I'll move on to Claire. Scanning through. Oh, right, okay, I found it. Okay, Claire, can I pass over to you with your report of the auditing process that you undertook?
Certainly, yes.
Many thanks.
Steph is going to share the slides for us. Thank you. Just as a means of introduction of anybody who hasn't met me previously, I am Claire Lawton. I'm the Acting Assistant Director for Quality Assurance in Children's Social Care. So if you have the slides, Steph, that would be great. Thank you. So if we just move on, just to set the context a little. So in the, as chair of the Performance and Quality Assurance Workstream for SEND, our purpose of this group primarily, just to remind colleagues of context, was to really bring together multi-agency colleagues to have a think about and reflect on how to update and improve our quality assurance framework. And our particular focus of these sessions has been around designing an EHCP audit tool together that we could then take and use. And our proposed outcome of that is to have a regular revisit of this with a real focus on the quality of EHCP. And as colleagues have spoken about already, we do have the data that we can sit alongside that, where we can look at the improvements in the timeliness of that, but we really want to interrogate alongside that, what is the quality of the plans, what is the learning from that together, and how we can put that forward into recommendations to work with colleagues. Longer term as well, what we would want to do is to be able to use this alongside the data, alongside the QA information that we have from KPIs, surveys from staff reporting, family feedback, so that we can bring together a quarterly report, which can be then shared with the SEND exec stream. So just to familiarise ourselves, we all know that the requirement from the SEND Code of Practice is that the HCP needs assessment senior leadership team should be monitoring the quality and sufficiency of that. So we brought together 9 senior managers, we designed the tool, we then proposed that we selected 10 randomly selected EHCPs of families in Newham, and that we would facilitate a multi-agency review of those and make recommendations. Next slide, please, Steph. So to do that, first of all, we had a little bit of a run through where we brought together colleagues that you can see listed on the left there. And really the purpose of that was to give ourselves familiarity of the tool and to alleviate any questions and dilemmas that may arise before we went into the live audit, so to speak. And to do that, we also shared best practice examples from the Council for Disabled Children as well, to help people familiarise themselves with what we would really want from an outcome-focused audit, as I said, to sit alongside the data. And then the second part of our methodology, which is key, is the moderation process. So as I said, we selected a cohort of 10 and we agreed that we would moderate 50% of those. As it came out in our learning as we went along with this, which I'll speak more to in our outcomes, findings and recommendations, it was actually the moderation meeting that provided the real richness of thinking and information that came out. So we'll talk a little bit more about how we recommend we might want to take forward further audit processes that actually take place as a live discussion, as opposed to a paper exercise and then coming together. So what I'm going to share here, so these were the gradings that came. This is the overall grading for each of the 10 EHCPs that we looked at. And they were graded between 1 and 5. So if we took 5 as being the very best it could be, and 1 is the opposite, in a grading framework, we would have 5 as being outstanding and 1 as inadequate. So what we can see there are the overall scores, and I'll come on to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But what I'd like to add here, if I may, which we didn't have included in here, is some of the feedback that we also took, because it's clearly very important to get the feedback from the parents and carers involved. We did have an invite for participation in the moderation meeting, but the representatives weren't able to attend. So my colleagues in Children's Social Care QA did make contact with the families included in this, and we got responses from 6 parents and 1 foster carer. And the qualitative information that came out there very, very much aligns with the information that's been shared by Dr. Lindsay, and also in the conversation that came out with colleagues in our moderation meeting as well. So where things had worked well, people were happy with the educational input. Where things could have improved, it was again thinking about the timeliness of responses for people and the communication with the families. And most that we spoke to said they would like more support. So we were asked the parents or carers in that to grade their experience of the HC process between 1 and 10, with 10 being the best. The average scale that came out of that of people that we spoke to was at 5, so that would put that in the requires improvement category. And it ranged between the highest grading given was an 8, that was from a foster carer. The lowest we had was 1 at 1, and then the rest were between 5 to 7. Okay, so just move on to the next slide, please. So all of the HCPs that we looked at in this particular sample, 7 were given an overall grade of under 3, which we would equate to a lower requires improvement or within the inadequate area. The remaining scored as 3, which would be towards the more higher end of the requires improvement and moving into adequate. We didn't amend any of the gradings during our P moderation discussion, but we did have one family in discussion where we felt that we needed to escalate that, and we recommended a professionals meeting to be arranged, which did take place yesterday, and we've taken some learning from that we can implement back in feedback as well. Okay, so if we move into the next slide, which is the themes that came through. So again, this is a very kind of overarching themes that I can talk to you about, and what we'd need to do is obviously replicate this again, and we will be able to give a more full and detailed report when we have more information to analyse. But the themes that came through consistently were content of the plans being more parent or carer focused, so more work on conveying and strengthening the voice of the individual child or young person in the plan. There were some good examples of children's views being articulated, and there was some really interesting discussion around that, but we did feel that that could be stronger. But the interesting discussion that came out, I think, between colleagues in that moderation meeting was the differentiation between the hopes and dreams that parents hold for children and the reality of what that might be. And we thought it was important that we do articulate the hopes and dreams of young children and their families, but we also think alongside with that with parents and carers about what the reality of that may be and how we could assist that. There were inconsistencies of sharing information. Sorry, to see a question come, how many have been quality assured? I'll come back to that, sorry. There's inconsistencies of evidence in the information, and particularly the medical documents. And again, what was interesting in the moderation discussion, when people had done their exercise individually in their own service areas and graded, and then we came together to discuss where we felt medical information wasn't present, in discussion, what we could see was that actually it was, and it had been shared. So there's something about that sharing of information together, which I'll come on to in the recommendations. Overall, some of the language used in planning was considered to be a little vague and not consistently purposeful or outcome focused. So we had a lot of discussion around thinking around in the context, if you were the recipient of this plan, if you were the parent or carer or young person, is this something that you would pick up and made sense to you and was written for you and with you? Next slide, please. So difficulty of combining different reports. So if there were 2 or more reports from the same agencies, sometimes we weren't facilitating the key extraction of those to come together again to formulate a plan, which interestingly again came up more in discussion and really fed into our recommendations. The medical information could appear in different sections and wasn't always clear. Outcomes better on the short term, but more work needed to be done, we thought, around strengthening longer term aspirations rather than just looking at the short term targets. The what's important to me document, we had some good examples. Again, it's a small cohort, but they were variable in their quality and not always consistent. Again, mirroring conversations from earlier, not always the appropriate information we would require from children's social care, so some strengthening about working across there. And then a really key theme that came out were the discussion around plans as transactional rather than relational, and it all kind of roads led back to co-production really in this conversation, which again I'll talk about in the recommendations. And if we were to work earlier with parents and carers, how that may impact on the trust with families and have a shared agreement about what we can do together. Okay, so coming on to the recommendations then. So as it stands at the moment, we had thought about doing 20 EHCP audits quarterly. From the learning that we got out of the discussion and having a reflection session afterwards in our policy assurance subgroup, what people really felt and wanted to share and propose for consideration by colleagues was that it's possible, if it was possible to do less audits bi-monthly, but they were to be done as a live exercise, so a live learning exercise, as we did in the moderation meeting. And it was felt that that would give a more quality learning response. It's something that we take back into the organisation and really think about that feedback loop and how that's put into practice via workforce development streams, etc., and how we could then track that back and look at the impact of that. We wanted to increase the parent carer Senko input in moderation meetings. So that's something we took as learning that we will need to take forward. And we will add the referrer and family feedback section into the audit tool. As I said, we did collate that, but it isn't set in there, so we will need to increase that. Next slide, please. So as I spoke about, co-production was a continuous theme throughout the discussion, and we all felt that this should be taking place before the assessment, prior to the 20-week process. There was discussion around the reality of that, with the pressures of timescales, and various suggestions were considered, either around could there be a triage process around which one do we do first, who would we want to see first, do we have a monthly meeting where it takes place? But everybody was in agreement that if we were to sit down and meet with the families and do that co-production meeting as standard, that would certainly increase, hopefully, the quality of the planning, build a more trusting relationship with the families that we're working with and with partners and colleagues, and also ultimately, hopefully, longer term, reduce issues that we have around the quality of planning. We would want to review the approach taken to therapy for children with chronic issues who are discharged from therapy, and review our training offer by a DfE improvement advisor in light of the audit findings. And I think a key part to that, again, was taking it back to that core understanding of what writing a good outcome focused plan looks like, and putting it into the position of, again, thinking, if I was to pick this up, would this give me what I need for me and for my child? So we were considering a multi-agency training programme to be considered purely with a focus on outcome focused planning. So that is a very brief overview of the process that took place last week. I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. So we've got about 10 minutes for questions. Saw some in the chat.
Look at the chat.
Anyone who had a question in the chat wants to raise it now? Caroline, did I see you raise your hand? Yes, I can see it now. Yeah, Caroline, please.
That's really, really interesting, and it's heartening to hear kind of some of the decisions that you've made and some of the judgments that you've made. And I think the fact that you want to bring parents in is something that's music to my ears. I think just another thing, I kind of mentioned it in the other one, but it might be quite interesting to pull out particular types of need and look at kind of some of the streams of how those are coming about. Because my comment before about moderate learning difficulties, I am quite moderate difficult to diagnose in a school, and so I kind of thought it would be a small number, but when I saw the national number for it, I was a little bit like, wow, that is something that is surprising to me. So I'd be curious to know the few moderate learning difficulty EHCs that we have, what is it about those ones that have got an EHC? And I think schools would be interested to know, and I think the comments you made about some of the health professionals and their reports, I think sometimes schools struggle to know which health professional or which agency to get moderate learning diagnosis. So I think that could be quite an interesting next step.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. And obviously we will take that, and we want to strengthen the quality of the reporting each time, really, and look at more specific themes and areas. So that's a really helpful comment. Thank you, Caroline.
Okay, anybody else?
Jeff, I think.
Can I come in? Sorry. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I saw you had your hand up, Yummy.
Yeah, sorry. I saw that.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Yeah. Hi, Claire. Because I put in the chat about you said you're doing some quality assurance. So I was just wondering, out of the EHCPs, the final ones being issued, how many of them have been quality assured? And just going back, you were talking about like a cohort of maybe 10. Mm-hmm. So those 10 you're doing quality assured on, are these parents or foster parents happy with the plan? Because there's a lot of parents who feel like their plans have not been quantified, specified, and a lot of issues going on. So if they've got that ongoing issue going on with the plan, and you're doing a quality assurance on that plan, so how does that work? Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. So I think there's two streams to think about in quality assurance. So with this particular one, this was a focus piece of work that we do as part of an audit process in a quality assurance team. But then I think in day-to-day practice, there is quality assurance that operational leads in those service areas will take out themselves. In this particular piece of work, we made contact with all of the parents or carers involved in the 10 EHCP that we looked at. We got feedback from 7 in total of them. But they did raise, they were able to raise their concerns around primarily it was around communication and the timeliness really of the responses that they had. But it's absolutely key, and it's something that we need to continue to do and strengthen and take that on board. Thank you.
Thank you. I think 7 is just a very low number in regards to how many plans have been issued. So
yeah, it is, and that's something I guess for colleagues to think about and to feed back to us, because if we do a higher number, we can get through more, but sometimes in doing less, it enables us to have a really in-depth look and gives us more detailed information that we can then feed back into actual, because what we want to do is to make it purposeful, and what we want is to actually learn from it and put that back into the whole system about how we improve practice. If we do a higher number, we can get a lot of information that may repeat themes for us and tell us the same thing. And it's about what we learn from it, but it's more importantly about what we do with it. And then for the quality assurance team to actually track the impact of that, because we'd want to see what difference that was making. But it's certainly, the amount that we do is open for discussion, and I'd welcome feedback from colleagues on that. Thank you.
Sorry, just last one. I know the amount is important, but it's just how they were selected as well. I think just parents to.
Yeah, no, they were it's purely randomly selected, so that the colleagues in data and performance will have a list of children and young people who have an EHCP plan, and they're randomly selected from that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Jessica?
Yeah, I think there were some really good and important questions, just kind of testing the fidelity of the approach. And I think it's it's really helpful to be very clear that the cases were randomly selected. And thanks to colleagues for that piece of work, and thank you, Claire, for leading it and providing the overview. I really welcome the idea of kind of a thematic approach going forward, and also that sort of thematic approach where we can kind of hone in on particular elements, for instance, co-production, voice of the child, outcome-led assessment. So I think that is that's something I'm really looking forward to kind of working on as Newham Post, as the new head of SEND. And yeah, and I think as you kind of rightly say, Claire, it's about kind of taking the learning as the first step, but then equally or more importantly about building that learning into a continuous cycle of practice improvement, and then tracking the outcomes. What difference is it making? So I think this is a really important and meaningful part of our work.
Okay, many thanks. I can't see any more hands at the moment. Anthony, I know you had a question in the chat about involvement of SENCOs. Claire, do you want to comment on that in terms of what's happened?
Yeah, we haven't had the level of SENCO input on that particular cohort of audits, but it's something we would definitely want to, as we go on, we would want to bring in anybody who's available and interested and able to contribute to that. And that's something we'll look at, Stephanie, won't we?
Yeah, just to come in there. So we have 2 SENCOs who sit on our quality assurance group, but unfortunately the majority of this audit took place during the summer, which is why our SENCOs weren't as heavily involved with this audit. But there's definitely the intention that they would be part of that going forward, and with the kind of bi-monthly setup, that could be well programmed in advance to avoid those holiday periods.
Yeah, can I just add, I think it would be really helpful to have specific feedback, the kind of feedback that we've just had, shared with the next SENCO forum if it hasn't already been done. And the more that the SENCO forum as a whole is aware of how the quality assurance is going, they'll either that might stimulate more of them to get involved in the next stage of it.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any other points? Tim?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Yeah, just on I see there's a point in the chat as well about co-production, and I'm sure colleagues might want to talk about that. But one of the things I know that we've been reflecting on since seeing some of these the feedback from the audits is the mechanism and the approach to EHCPs and how we deliver those. And Jessica might want to say a bit more, but we're certainly reviewing how the team operates. Quite a lot of these plans are currently commissioned outside, and one of the key objectives is to do more of the plan writing internally. But Jessica, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yes, thank you, Tim. That is something that I'm looking at. It's week 4 and really kind of honing in on, and something that we're mapping out. But we do feel like we want kind of a tighter control on the way in which the plans are written and the way in which we use this quality assurance framework to really drive our, and improve our practice. So it's not something that's going to kind of a change that will be affected immediately, but it is very much in the line of sight.
Okay, thanks for that, and thanks Jessica as well. I think sorry, Adiola, I think your hand's up, please.
Yeah, hi. I put my questions in the chat, but I think Tim said some things,
Okay,
which has led to another question based on what you just said, saying I think it's commissioned outside some of the plans. Is it the plan writing? So my question is, based on that and looking at quality in terms of comparative analysis, if you're doing a lot that's going outside, that's been commissioned and people are writing it from not within the staff you have in there, what is the quality of those things? Is money being spent properly in terms of, if it's going outside, it's outsourced as an example, how many are coming back based on the fact that I think I've forgotten your name, what you said earlier, about 7 or how many were used to do this thing, but the one Yamu was saying, so the numbers that were used to do this analysis, to do audits is a bit low, so just to look at it, if we're doing things from outside, because we're still hearing from parents that these plans have got issues. So if we're sending it out, it's being outsourced, how are we ensuring that it's being done properly?
Okay, thanks Adiola, that's great. Yeah, Claire?
Stephanie, did you want to come in? Steph, I thought you were going to.
It's a really good and valid point, Adiola. So one of the things that has been put in place to address that issue around outsourcing is much more frequent. I think it's now bi-weekly meetings with our outsourced provider. And we've also set up a kind of quality assurance checklist. So when plans come in, they are reviewed internally by the service. They go through a QA process internally before they are issued. But I think, the findings of our audit show that there's still much more work to do there. And I think there's a general agreement amongst everyone in the partnership that the strength of relationships between professionals also helps the quality of our plans. And so by having those done internally, we think that we can get much better quality plans and more focused kind of outcomes due to co-production meetings taking place at an earlier stage. So I think whilst we have put quality assurance measures in place, there's a more fundamental system change here that we want to deliver.
Thanks very much, Steph. Okay, well, I think we can go now onto the breakout room. So we had a lot of information today and a lot of ideas coming up, and ranging from the sort of statistics and the data right through to the quality. So, and the point's been made that things are not just about doing them quickly, but about doing them well and getting it right first time. If you get it right first time, you're not going back and sort of taking up more time, but sorting out things that didn't go well in the first place. So, Steph, do you want to just say something about the breakout rooms, and then we'll go on to that, finishing at about 1:45. 1:45, is it? 1:45?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to split into two smaller breakout sessions, and the purpose of this is kind of one, to have a kind of point of reflection on all that we've heard in the first part of the session, but also to start thinking more specifically about what might be some of the short-term changes that we as a partnership think we could make to address the issues raised. So we're going to divide this into two sections. So we're going to come together to first look at some of the short-term things that we think could be addressed quite quickly, and then to look at the longer-term system changes and some of the principles of that change that we want to see in the system going forward. So we'll do 10 minutes on short-term, and then we'll come back together, feedback, and then break out again to talk about some of the longer-term system changes. So I hope that sounds okay. I'm going to try and use Zoom to the best of my ability now to put us into a breakout. And I will hopefully see you all in a new room in about a minute. Okay, I think that looks right. I'm going to set us up now.
Throw in a so it seemed that several times comments were made about communication, the level and type of communication. Senko's mentioned frequently, as well as other groups, obviously parents and schools collectively, but it felt that that question was coming up enough times that maybe things are a little bit fractured in that way, and that could be something that could be a quick win.
Great, thank you, Sandy. Any other colleagues want to come in on that point? I know there's lots of work going on at the moment around our Senko network, and I think strengthening that relationship, but also creating those opportunities, I think, for us to come together informally within the partnership would probably, I think, make a real difference there too.
I think, Steph, there was just the point about the sort of broader professionals being involved in the process. That, you know, from a youth work perspective, it's always great when we're brought in and part of the conversations when they're being done.
Yeah, I'm not sure how colleagues felt, but I thought it was really interesting seeing just the range of professionals that go into a single EHCP. It's a really kind of broad, multidisciplinary approach that's kind of needed, isn't it? And lots of different components and expertise. And I think from being involved in the EHCP kind of audit process, it was really interesting watching different professional groups kind of provide that healthy challenge on maybe areas that weren't necessarily their professional expertise, but they were able to challenge on the basis of how does this read for a family? I don't need to be an expert. I should be able to understand, you know, the plan itself, and taking that lens, I think, was really interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was a really helpful approach, having that multi-agency approach, because then I think it also helps then us implement what changes we need to see across the system. I wondered whether it's worth considering the future, though they said, you know, they're chosen just at random at the moment, looking at themes or certain age groups. So it might be helpful, for example, to look at slightly older young people who may be transitioning, and it might be worth considering looking at EHC reviews as well as the initial plans, just to see what progress is being made for individual young people.
Great, thanks, Christina. I think transitions come up a lot in discussion across the partnership as being a real area that we want to focus in on.
I think picking up on Adiola's point around, you know, the fact that we have an outsourced plan writing organisation at the moment, how we make sure that feedback loop of the themes is really, really tight with them as part of those regular meetings. So I just think it's something that we can probably strengthen with some of the evidence that we get from the audits.
Can I don't know if you can see my hand, guys. I didn't want to jump in. Steph, it was more, I know I've raised this before, so there's a kind of whole thing around EHCPs that are agreed, and I'm really struggling to get ones that are refused, because a big issue that's potentially coming up is those that are rejected, and then the quality assurance of those, and just what's the role of kind of the area Senko, especially when we think about transition into reception. We are finding that if they are rejected or we're not sure, then what professionals are involved, and there is a key role for the area Senkos, and then the kind of we've got, you know, nearly 40 Senkos trained across providers. So this feels very much a school conversation, but there is a challenge about those rejected EHCPs and who is reviewing those and who is QAing those, because we are getting challenged, especially from transition, as I said, from early years to school, as to why it's not meeting the criteria, especially when we've had children in 6.5K funded assessment places, and then all of a sudden it's, oh, it doesn't meet the need. But there doesn't seem to be any data. We don't seem to know the numbers, and we don't know who's QAing them.
So that's a really useful point, Kirsty. Interestingly, because Professor Lindsay asked me to look at this yesterday, so I actually have the numbers very, very fresh in my head. But we looked over the course of a year at how many cases had been accepted through the referral EHCP process and how many had been rejected. And I think on average, it was about 83% of our cases were accepted. So incredibly high in comparison to other local areas. And we were kind of working on what could be the hypothesis behind that. And it was that we felt that we probably had a high number of children that were on high needs funding who were coming through. And so naturally there was lots of supporting evidence and lots of evidence of the work that had taken place and why a plan was needed, which meant our percentages were quite high. But I think that point around, you know, whatever it is, that 17% that are potentially being rejected, are they from a specific cohort? Are they the under fives? Are they, you know, really starting to get some of the detail on that? So I think that could be a really sensible kind of next step in our analysis. But overall, it was interesting that we had a much higher rate of plans being accepted, but then also, of referrals being accepted, but then also those referrals becoming plans. So very, very few, and that's probably a good thing, right? Very few cases that progressed to assessment didn't then get a final plan as a result of that assessment. Sandy, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, following on from that, I'm always wondering, what are the barriers to meeting the 20-week threshold? And that ties in with the idea of rejection and evidence and so on. Do we really understand where those issues are so that we can identify what we can have an impact on and what perhaps actually we can't, and that number might change, but to use our time effectively. But I don't know, do we understand what are the barriers, what is holding that up?
Yeah, if I can come in here, I mean, yeah, there's a whole set of different factors, Sandy. I mean, some of it is sort of historic practice and not having sufficient capacity in the right place. Some of it is the fact that because we've got a relatively low proportion of education, health and care plans, we're now seeing a sort of bulge of demand. So the level of referrals is pretty high, and that's because we're sort of catching up with perhaps where we should have been. There's a significant element that's about process and how we have effective systems in place. And, you know, Anita and colleagues are doing a lot of work to redesign those processes. And finally, there is a real challenge around capacity in key parts of the system. So education psychology capacity has been a major factor. It's not the only one, but Steph and colleagues have identified if we could increase education psychology capacity, we are more likely to get a greater number of plans through, and a greater number of plans through within timescale as well. So there's a lot of data and analysis that we haven't shared today, but I think we should share as soon as we can organise a time to share it. But there's been a lot of thought. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a miracle cure. You know, I think there'll be other factors and issues we'll need to look at. So, you know, this is not about a fix. This is about an ongoing process of improvement. I think it's going to, you know, take quite some time to achieve.
I mean, I'd just like to add, anecdotally, and particularly in my setting, we do see the older young people who've not had any assessment, we feel need a plan, and quite often there are parents who are resistant to that. They aren't recognising that the needs, or that they have a different opinion. Now, you know, that's valid, but it's very frustrating for my staff. I can think of 2 cases in particular at the moment where it really does need to proceed to plan, but it's persuading parents that is a good pathway. And obviously we're not going to count those because they don't go forward for referral or assessment. So for me, it's an issue. It may not be such a big percentage in mainstream, of course.
And just thinking actually about how our kind of early help service can really support with that element of gaining consent. You know, professionals within the early help space are so well versed at having those conversations, and you know, so are social workers, but that consent-led model is very, very prominent in those early intervention services and our youth services as well, actually. And I wonder if there's some learning that we can try and embed from how they've got around it and done it, because that's definitely something that schools more broadly fed back to us, that there were those families that they really did struggle to get consent for. And even Sendias, we've got Sendias with us on the call, haven't we? And how we can use those avenues as well.
I think we've exploited a lot of that, but we'll keep trying.
I'm sure you have. Okay.
I think as a parent, what you just said, Steph, it just comes to when I was asking the question, how do we define co-production? Yeah. If some parents are not even aware, they don't even understand it. So if you have like a standardized template, like making them understand the reasons behind this, you know, and why it is needed, as an example, then it would help. So just making it clear in just regular language that this is what it's about, because most people don't even understand it. And then do we also have a percentage of those that end up going to Sendias or to tribunal or to mediation, stuff like that, just to understand, you know, how well things are going?
I think that's a really useful and helpful point, Adiola. And I think that came up a bit in conversation as well. So one of the questions that a parent posed that I thought was really interesting was, well, do I get a diagnosis from an educational psychologist? Like what's the value of that assessment? What will that give me and my child? And making those things very clear and understanding this is, you know, what the plan would give you, this is the support that comes out of it, or this is just the assessment process and this is how the assessment process will help you know more about, you know, your child's needs and how to support them, would add a lot of value. Right, I've been very bad at my breakout duties. Let me just bring everyone back in and we can come together and feedback on some of the suggestions, but really great ones here. Should we'll get a 60-second countdown now? Just wait for the second group to join us. Great, just checking I haven't lost anyone. A few more. Brilliant. I think most of us have made our way back now into the main room. So Jeff, I'm not sure if you'd like to lead us on a few of the good suggestions that came out of your group discussion, and then I'm sure colleagues will also feed in from the first breakout group. Jeff, I think you might be muted.
You don't do anything and you suddenly get cut off, but thought I got on top of it. Thanks, Steph. Yes, I think it was a very successful session. I think probably everybody had something to say. A lot of positives, a lot of welcoming for the things which have been done, like, you know, getting better idea of data, but also recognizing the nuances with data. Data have to be contextualized. You know, a Newham is an outlier in many ways, so, you know, we have to be careful. But also issues concerned with how to develop on the audit system or the quality assurance in a much broader way, you know, particularly including parents and Senkos and so on. Also, something which we haven't touched upon, but I know that is a very great interest in terms of the authority, is the whole issue of outcomes and the importance of really having an outcomes focus in the process, not just looking backwards, but, you know, going forward and looking both short term and longer term. And also another important point, which again, we haven't focused on, is annual reviews. A lot of concern, particularly from parents, but I think it's recognised, lots of nods here also, that is an area that needs to be examined a lot, and issues of typicality and how people make decisions, you know, and the proportions of people making inputs and so on. Yeah, I'll stop there. There's quite a few things there, and perhaps just move on straight on to you, I think, Steph, to give some feedback. Or is
Great. I'm gonna run through some of the great suggestions that came out of our group, and then colleagues in the group feel free to chime in. So we discussed quite a lot around the connection with Senkos as the wider partnership and how we strengthen that, and how we ensure that we're creating kind of opportunities for informal meetings between professionals to get to know each other, but also to kind of support our practice more generally. We spoke about transitions as maybe a key area that we might want to look at as part of our next audit, which had a lot of agreement amongst the group. We talked about actually the importance of presenting back the audit work that Claire and colleagues have been involved in to our outsourced provider, and making sure that we're really sharing some of those key themes that have come out in discussion. We also wanted to do a bit of a deep dive on those cases that are refused or not progressing to assessment. And, you know, we commented on the fact that that's quite low in Newham, but actually there's a lot of learning that we can do and kind of build in that infrastructure around our area Senkos to support that learning and development there. We talked about really breaking down the barriers to timeliness, and lots of work has happened on this. So we felt that that was something worth bringing back to this group on the key issues and our kind of projections and timelines. We also spoke about why there may be some reluctance amongst parents to go for that assessment or EHCP, and what were some of the kind of tools at our disposal, the different professionals in our system that are really strong at having conversations around consent that can help us to do that. And more particularly, we talked about actually the importance of language. How clear is it what the purpose of an EHCP is and what you'll get out of it, and making sure that that the forms that we're asking our parents and colleagues to complete are as easily accessible as possible. So there were quite a few really great suggestions there. I may have forgotten a few, so please do chime in if there's any.
Okay. Well, that's great. There's plenty there, and I know there's some others. And I think also running through a lot of these is the issue of actually having good relationships. You know, relationships between, you know, officers, professionals, and parents. And a lot of the difficulties come, I think, when in addition to the system itself, the system is not necessarily person friendly, and many parents that I've spoken to have got comments about that. So that was another area for something to be developed. So I think, Steph, are we going to go back into the second bit now?
We are. I'm going to press the breakout room. I'm not sure if you'll end up in the same groups or not, but we'll wait and see.
Right.
And this discussion is going to be on some of the longer term system changes that we want to see as a result of this work.
Oh, see, we've got you, Steph.
Oh, I might go join the other group because I should definitely be doing some note taking.
Right, do you want to go on the other one then? Okay.
I will. See you in a bit.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I guess we're all
Might be able to turn around quite quickly, and Tim as well, Aldcroft. But what do we think longer term? Steph, you're here. Just opening up the question again, really, about actually what do we want to see within the system much longer term to shift things.
I'd be interested in. Oh,
sorry, go on, Christina.
Sorry, Audrey. I'd be interested in how we embed person-centered planning earlier and how that supports early help, prevention, early intervention, and what models we have. If there's anything really good that we're doing already, could we expand that, develop that, and what do we need to support that? Is that about training? Is that about tools? Is that about how we use Senkos and others?
So I just want to follow on from that and what you've just mentioned in the chat, Tim. I think that relational thing is so important, and I think that's what when I was talking about some of the other professionals who are involved in those young people's lives, that's where sometimes they might have been carrying a relationship with that young person for several years. So it's really important to have that walked it up. And in terms of the approaches around co-production and things like that, there's, you know, I wonder whether there's some of the things that we've been discussing in the co-production rights and awareness work stream, some of the audit that's come through from their aspects of that we could look at with regards to this as well, because those relate to not just the specifics of what happens in the moment around co-production, but actually what needs to be considered within services to make sure that that work is properly resourced so it's done in a meaningful way.
And my question was very similar about the system that's in place. What are the parts of the system that impact on it being relational and the impact on it being person-centered? And I'm curious about the fact that the planned creations are outsourced, and does that impact on that? And is that something that we would need to look at in the long term to change that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Audrey. I think this is a legacy that we need to address, because I think it should be about building relationships, whether it's with parents, young people, or settings, and building and developing a sort of a different culture across SEND services. So I think there has been a culture of process and transaction rather than a culture of co-production and relationship. And I think that's where we need to move. It's easier said than done, of course, but I think that should be the long-term plan. I think also, how do we, and you know, we've necessarily had to address a sort of a historical deficit of not having the right number of children on plans, you know, and that it's right that we're doing that. But it'd be nice to think that in the future, people weren't so focused on needing a plan to receive support. Actually, you get earlier support without necessarily needing to have a plan in place. So how can we work in a way that I think is more preventative and provides earlier support without needing to go through very significant processes? And how do we generally improve parental experience and young people's experience? I think that's really critical.
I know different areas look at that differently, but I know there's areas, for example, that have kind of invested a lot in person-centered approaches, and they'll do, to say, 2 cycles of person-centered planning before it goes through for a full EHC needs assessment, unless there's really exceptional need, for example. So there's probably different approaches we could look at.
Sandy, did you want to come in there? No, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, really, I've got a comment that I hope ties that together, because one thing that I've observed working with social care colleagues, and I've mentioned this before in other forums, that to understand what other agencies are doing, providing, with I think you remember, Tim, I mentioned new social workers, what's their induction? Do they get a good impression of what the education landscape is in Newham? But similarly across all the other agencies as well, where they're involved in the planning. And I think bringing planning internally, it's got to build on that, because it's understanding what actually is going on in the borough, what's available, what the provision is, and how we can all work together and building on that. And what you say about what early help is being put in place, of course it's being put in place. You don't have to wait for a plan to help a child, but are we helping each other? I mean, in my setting, we have to do a lot of that. A child will arrive potentially also from out of borough with a poor background and history that we can work with, and you do it. You make sure that child is supported in class. Then you've got the whole process of getting perhaps towards that plan, but you don't wait for that. But how do you draw on other agencies, other services? What expertise is there, and how do we access that in that process? So understanding what everybody's doing across the board is only going to make that stronger if we can make sure we've got that level of understanding, communication. But I'm very conscious that you can't make that too broad, otherwise it just gets diluted again. We've got to be sort of target perhaps a little bit more closely, so that as a school leader, I could say, right, I know we need to go to CAMS for that, or I know we need to go to health for that, whatever it might be, but actually really be quite focused and understanding that that is the pathway to take.
I also wondered whether we should do some horizon scanning of some of the systemic issues, particularly thinking around workforce. I mean, I'm aware of some of the gaps in workforce, for example, around speech and language therapists. There's probably others. So, you know, looking at what we do as a system to support that, whether that's about training, but I think just naming some of the issues and being really aware of it and surfacing it would be helpful, because I think that's going to continue to be a challenge for us.
And just leading on to what Sandy said, and I don't know, Sandy, if you were in the earlier meeting today when we talked about social work inductions, when actually we said it's about workforce induction, so that this induction needs to be done right across the children's workforce, so that everyone who may have come into contact with a family knows what's available, knows how the system works. And we were talking about whether we do it through the lens of the needs of a family and do kind of an induction that goes right across, that everyone does. It's a rolling programme, and that we use the prism of a family to say, actually, at this stage with this need, this is what the family will get, these are the agencies. And so we're looking at, through the education subgroup that I'm part of, how we can do that, and using and replicating some of the inductions that are done in other boroughs. So we're going to bring some examples of how we can do that, but definitely beyond social care and having that across the children's workforce.
Tim, you've been patiently waiting.
Yeah, I think actually both, well, all Audrey, Christina and Sandy all touched on things I was going to say. So, I mean, because I think even in thinking about the relational stuff, all of what you said, Sandy, is actually the relational stuff between professionals. It's exactly that. And the sort of workforce development. I mean, in our service, one thing that we're really keen on is any, and this relates to all the sort of equality strands that we're trying to improve in terms of our offer, is that any of the training that comes in, we offer it out across as broad a range of providers as possible. So, I mean, recently we're involved in some training that was done through Raj's team around some of the sort of different communication methods. We're looking to be delivering some having some BSL training delivered, and that gets offered out across our broader broader partnership, really. And within our service, we now have a working group of youth workers from each of the youth zones and each part of the service who have a focus on SEND. So we're really keen to just keep, you know, having that route into our service for the kind of skills and knowledge that we know is going to make hopefully our offer more accessible, because at the moment it's not nearly as accessible as it should be, and that's what we're really trying to drive up. So yeah, there's lots there. Also, just a little bit of a plug for this event that we've got in a couple of weeks' time on a Saturday. This it's really as an outcome of lots of the work that was done in the summer that I know Steph and Julie have been really pulling together about getting all the services that do the summer offer more connected up. And I was wanting to maintain those contacts so that overview and the easy access with which people will understand better what is on offer, that we keep that going. So we've got an event at the Leisure Centre on the 23rd, which has got lots of sporting activities, but as well as lots of providers and also parts of the council that are coming to us around consultation saying that if you come there, you know, there's an opportunity to meet young people where they're at and engage in some of that work. So, and our hope is that those become quite regular events, hopefully quarterly events, but all just part of building up a more visible and connected picture of what the offer is.
Tim, I'll definitely bring you in when we join the main group again, so you can make a plug for for the event. Paul, I noted that you've got lots of comments there in the chat. Did you want to come in?
I think the comments really say what they say, but I think long term, I think this part of this has got to be consideration of investment in send leaders in schools. Many of them are to become future leaders, new school leaders. Often they are the most inclusive in their leadership, their thinking, particularly around you know, removing barriers and dealing with system challenges. But I think we could do some great work to invest in them as leaders, as a leadership forum, particularly in terms of co-designing some of the new tools, if you like, strategies, approaches that we want to take. But I guess behind that, it's really strengthening their understanding and knowledge of assessment of need linked to process, so that they are certain, and between them they, if you like, act as a peer moderation group on such matters of assessment, because I'm just curious as to how strong our SENCOs really are in their leadership, particularly around the assessment of children's needs, and whether we've got some irregularities in assessment leading to, say, some overinflated figures, which might otherwise be you know, better diagnosed in different ways in different categories, or dare I even say, would be what we would deem to be low level behaviour challenges that are not necessarily send support, without being controversial.
Thanks, Paul. Tim, you've mentioned adult social care in the comments.
Yeah, no, I just wondered if there was more opportunity for us to work closer with adult social care, particularly on the point that Christina raised around person-centred planning, because they're clearly more expert at that than I think we are, probably, but also just focusing on some of those areas of transition. So I think there might be more we can learn from other services in this area.
And just thinking of that family element as well, I guess our support that we're providing to sibling groups of children and young people with SEND, and bringing in that kind of young carers agenda as well, more clearly into our improvement work. Anita, did you want to come in?
Yeah, it was just on Sandy's point, actually. It's just something that's been coming up quite a lot in conversations that I've been having with head teachers, who actually look back to some years ago where there used to be a series of events, it seems, or opportunities for conversations for parts of the partnership to come together. I don't know what they looked like then, but they were certainly you know, remembered in a positive light. And I think as we move forward in the medium to long term, there's a real opportunity to think about how we create space and time, virtually or in person, to do some of that sharing, myth busting, opportunity thinking across the partnership, and led perhaps by different parts of the agencies at different times. It needs some thinking through, but I'd be really keen to get something like that back up and running. And as well as those sharing of things, I think there's opportunities for multi-agency training and reflection time on perhaps key pieces of reading, articles, etc., for us all to learn from. So just having an ongoing kind of learning cycle as part of, as a way of connecting back up.
Thanks, Anita. I've just noticed, apologies, Adiola, your hand's been up for a while. Would you like to come in?
No, that's all right. Thank you. I think I would just go back to what Tim put in the chat about being more relational, because I mean, from the parents' perspective, sometimes when I'm going to the meetings, and also I think someone talked about workforce. If the workforce are not aware, it's of no point all of this is happening at the end of the day, because even sometimes from department to department, you're getting issues whereby nobody understands like you talk about the branding, what exactly is Newham saying? So each person has almost like a Tesco or Asda. Each staff member should be working in that same kind of a way, so that you're not having the issues of maybe the SEND is saying this, that one is saying that, then you keep on passing parents, back and forth. The parents are not aware of what's going on internally. They just want to have what it is that says on the tin. So really and truly, being more relational, even amongst the workforce, and also long-term, whereby you wouldn't have to be outsourcing stuff, whereby even the staff within understand and know what to do and how to do it. So it's just a standard template that everybody should be following through. and you can always check that side of things. I think with that, that should make things really easy. And also what Anita just said about even revisiting the past. It's of no point, going forward and trying to redo new things. Whatever has worked before, why not look into that? I know there was a time we looked at, I think who came to check, was it the nursing side in the council? I don't know, they had very good rating. How did they get that? What happened? What are they doing that others can learn from? So really and truly, just be more relational within the workforce itself, be more relational, and that will permeate down to everybody really and truly if we all know what it is we're meant to be doing.
Brilliant. Right, I'm gonna put us back in the main group again so we can feed some of this back. I'll stay very quiet and let everyone in the room share their own ideas. So see you in a minute.
Just to say, we got another good this year.
Amazing. Right, Jeff, do you want to kick off with the feedback from your group? I think I might have muted you again, Jeff. Sorry. Joy of room changes.
There will be a day when I get used to this, but not sure when it's going to be. Yeah, so I was just saying, again, a great conversations and contributions. Very quickly, vision. Where are we going? Look, we're looking forward. We need some sort of vision. Stress on the development of our model of inclusion. What do we mean by that? And as a sort of one of the foci in it. So that's kind of the overall kind of context of working that out. There's specifics. Emma was talking about a threshold document which is being revised, looking to improve what will kind of feed into the local offer, but focusing there on actually something that people understand and the importance of how it's actually produced. The importance of getting long-term data on how children succeed. So not only in terms of kind of aspirations, but also seeing what we learn from those youngsters who do succeed or have difficulties. And Hugh was telling us about some current intentions to do surveys and actually ask people who are older, have you achieved what you were expecting to, etc., etc. And also population changes. We're going to have to look at the population changes. I know this is going on, and looking not only at the numbers, which are important, but also the nature of the different types and the way the interactions are. And you've already seen that from when the discussion earlier about the statistics. It's more than just the statistics in proportions or numbers, and it's also changes in what's happening. And then the other one, which was really very important, was COVID. Not just COVID now, but the longer term effects. And we talked in particular about what we already know amongst young children is speech language communication needs in a universal sense of large numbers of kids have already been very seriously affected. And we're going to have to kind of work our way through that over the next few years. And we don't know what the longer term implications of that are. Okay, a quick one.
Thanks, Jeff. I have given responsibility for feeding back to our wider group. I'm just going to do a quick reminder of some of the things we've said so colleagues can come in. But we had quite a long chat around person-centered planning and early intervention. So,
go on, Christina. You wanted to talk about that, didn't you?
Just to mute myself as a start. Yeah, we talked a lot about the opportunities we have around person-centered planning. We talked about some of the good examples we have of that already, but opportunities to bring all the agencies together and really clarify what early help support, what preventative support is available across our system, so that we can support schools and others to have access to that earlier and hopefully prevent some of the needs escalating.
There were some really lovely bits, Tim. I think you might want to come here around moving from transactional to relational models and being much more needs led.
Yeah, no, and it was very much about a culture change across the service and across the partnership. So how do we move to a point where we have more conversations about the needs of children and what is right for those children, and how do we develop stronger relationships between different professionals and between professionals and families? So yeah, how do you shift from a position where the focus is very much on the plan and the process to one that is much more focused on the quality of relationships and the quality of support?
Yeah. Okay, great. Now it is now, I think, 5 to 1. So before I thank everyone, let's just go through the last few bits of the agenda. The surveys, Steph, do you want to please update?
Yeah, so just to inform everyone on the commission, we have our next session is based on the theme of children, young people and family voice. And so we have our children and young people survey, which is currently out at the moment. That has gone to the Senko network and to parents of children that are currently educated outside of the borough. And that survey closes on the 25th of October. And we also will have a parent and carer survey, which is hopefully due to launch next week and is just in the final draft stages. And just really to encourage that promotion of those surveys across the partnership. We know they won't be, they won't be perfect, but they're a really good starting point for us to ensure that we start to collect kind of feedback from our children and families in a much more systemic way. And I'm just going to bring in Tim, who's going to talk to us about a little event that we've got going on, where you will also be able to complete the survey in real life, which is very exciting.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. Yeah, I just mentioned in the group previously, so we have a event coming up as a result of lots of the work that was happening before the summer. I know colleagues on here, particularly Yanu and Adiola, are involved in some of the really trying to bring together lots of the summer offer, what was available for young people through that time, and to start, I mean, by no means to get, I mean, we definitely didn't achieve a fully accessible summer offer through this summer, but we started in train the processes to improve what we think will be a better offer, both in terms of communicating what it is and also actually what the content and what the offer is. And as a consequence of trying to carry on that work, we've got an event coming up on the 23rd of October at Newham Leisure Centre, which is highlighting some of the sort of accessible sporting activities that are available. So that's things like bocce, wheelchair basketball, indoor archery, rowing, what else, multi-sports, a range of things, but then also having some space for some sensory activities. Raja's team is going to be there delivering some of that, and also supporting parents in understanding the kind of things that they can develop at home and stuff that they've got from the pound shop, to sort of carry on with some of that work. But then also there's going to be information stalls from providers and organisations from across the council. Like you mentioned, Steph, there's going to be the ability to complete the survey. Both surveys, there's going to be the opportunity to feed into other pieces of work that different parts of the council are seeking consultation on. I think the local plan people are going to be there for the local plan refresh and some other things, and then providers who can talk about their offer. So it's a first attempt at putting this together in this way, and I'm sure there's going to be lots for us to learn from it. But we've had a lot of support from people from across that group, so I'm really really hopeful it's going to be a good event. if you haven't seen the flyer already, we'll make sure we get it out to you. The flyer design actually was by a young person. The logo that's on it, when we were doing the Climate Youth Assembly, one of the young people, autistic young person, was involved in it, was talking about the fact that there should be more, as part of people feeling healthier and more engaging with their environment, there should be more sporting activities and stuff. So he named it Great Day to Play, and he's done a logo that's part of the flyer. So yeah, and I'm sure he'll be there on the day because he was well chuffed. But
Okay, thanks, Tim. That's great.
Question.
Lovely. Okay. Right. Steph, do you want to say anything more about that, or should we go on to the do you want to mention a demographic questionnaire?
Yes, so we've had a submission through to the SEN Commission inbox, which has asked if members of the SEN Commission would be comfortable completing a very short anonymous survey on demographic information, so that we can ensure that we have that that breadth of experience represented in the Commission. I just wanted to check that colleagues were happy to do so, and if so, we'll design up a quick anonymous survey that can be completed. I'm seeing some nods. Are people happy to do that?
Yeah.
Great, perfect. I'll get that in motion.
Okay, great. That would be really helpful, and I think it'll take a couple of seconds to complete. Is the idea, literally. Now, John, is John still here? Oh, I just lost him. Oh, I know, because he came in later and was apologising, but I've missed a chance to actually let him kind of bring us up to date. Okay, well, can I think we've done everything now. Just to mention that, you know, as you know, while we're not in the Commission, I'm still receiving kind of comments. You know, I had some discussions with the RNIB about some issues in children with vision impairment. You know, with DICE discussions there, going backwards with following a meeting of to report. Well, we'll have the surveys data as well. So can I thank everyone, because I think it's been a very intense meeting. That I'm really impressed how everyone's engaged in this, and loads of good ideas in here, which will all be feeding in. And as you know, the general trend now is to move from what we know into where we're going and how we're going to move in those directions. So many thanks to everyone. Do enjoy the rest of your day, and look forward to seeing everyone in a few weeks. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.